Thank you, and also thank you to State Secretary Bjørg Sandkjær for that strong message of resolve on behalf of the government and for direction to us. And great to see you all here at this place, which is suitably called Laughter, or Latter. Malaria is a terrible disease. It killed 690,000 people in 2021. And it doesn't pick its victims by chance. 96% of deaths were in sub-Saharan Africa. 80% of these were children below the age of 5. The number of malaria deaths has been reduced significantly, but the numbers have flattened and even increased during COVID. However, in 2022, the first ever malaria vaccine was put into regular use. Decades of hard work involving the quiet colossus of global health, Tore Godal, and many others, paid off. And in December, trials for a second malaria vaccine showed 80% efficacy. If approved, we can hope to meet the need for malaria vaccines by 2028. So, ladies and gentlemen, 2022 was a breakthrough year. You just haven't heard about it. It was also a terrible year, but more about that later. My aim for today is simple: that you leave more hopeful than you arrived here. So I can almost see the disbelief in your eyes on the 6th row there. But hear me out. I do not mean to underestimate the challenges we face, but I am convinced that hope is a stronger force, but above all, a more realistic scenario than doom and gloom. So let's look back. When Norwegian development assistance was introduced in 1950, 6 out of 10 people globally lived in extreme poverty. Most people were simply poor. 2 or 3 generations later, less than 10% live in extreme poverty. Electrification and education has gone from being luxury to widespread. The number of women who die in pregnancy and birth was reduced by 1/3 from 2000 to 2017. And maybe most impressive, child mortality was halved globally in 2 decades. These are numbers, yes, but the beauty of numbers is the stories they tell about people behind them. 5 million more children live to tell every year. Their mothers live to raise them. My mother grew up when the Marshall Plan for Europe was put into motion, and where reconstruction and rebuilding was all you could see. I was 17 years old when the Berlin Wall collapsed. The future was bright. All we could envision was progress and peace. It's like we have been spoiled with progress. And then, enter the 2020s. It was supposed to be the decade of action, but it has turned into the decade of backlash. And it's like we've also lost our optimism. Norad has done a population study prior to this conference. 6 out of 10 young Norwegians believe that living conditions in the world will get worse by 2050. Also in developing countries. So what happened? Well, there were dark clouds for some time, but with COVID, it really turned. We saw an increase in extreme poverty for the first time in decades, and backsliding on education, gender equality, child marriages, and of course global health. Data also suggests that COVID has increased global inequality after years of reduction. Then Russia's brutal attack on Ukraine has also been an attack on developing countries, jeopardizing food security. Today, a record 350 million people are facing acute risk of hunger, according to the World Food Programme. And underlying this is a rising number of people living in non-democratic states and a gradual increase in the number of conflicts globally. We simply see more conflict and more authoritarian rule. And of course, the long-term development destroyer is climate change and the loss of nature. Climate change is reducing agricultural outputs and reducing growth. It has a ticking clock to it. The climate crisis is different from other threats to humanity in that the problem created by some affects us all, and that a full solution for some depend on us all. And it is deeply unfair. Countries in the global south with hardly any emissions are by far the most vulnerable and have the least resources to adapt. It's the definition of injustice. The sum of this is that we are farther from reaching the sustainable development goals. But of course, make no mistake, great things happen also. It is the decade where a COVID vaccine was developed in record time, and the decade where we agreed on the Nature Agreement in Montreal, and where the digital technologies are spreading and contributing to development. But right now, we are way off track to ending poverty by 2030 and to reach the other SDGs. Thus, this is also a decade where development assistance becomes more important. Yes, it does. Because there is more poverty and bigger humanitarian needs. And because, unlike other capital flows, development assistance is extremely flexible. And because we can make it reach the poorest and most vulnerable. And lastly, because it works. A large body of evidence from international research shows that good development assistance not only saves lives, but contributes to economic growth. And this is a consistent finding over time. From Norad's perspective, three things are crucial. So first, to provide enough development assistance. Global financing needs to increase according to the actual needs. This is also a message to Norway, by the way. Second, development assistance needs to be knowledge-based. The difference between the most effective development assistance and the average is enormous. We need to spend wisely and fact-based. And third, the need to integrate development, climate, and nature. This is imperative. Our work to fight poverty should contribute to a greener future. And our work to cut emissions and adapt to the climate and nature crisis needs to create development among the poorest. The American economist Branko Milanovic has called COVID-19 the first truly global experience. It affected the whole world. We learned about it in real time, and the solution was global. But it will not be the last global moment. In our integrated world, global development is not someone else's responsibility. It's our common task. The climate crisis, nature loss, global inequality, extreme poverty, or a pandemic affect us together, and we must solve it together. Development assistance is a crucial tool for making sure that everyone can be part of these solutions. So friends, I am hopeful, but hope needs to be based on facts. So I sometimes call myself an empirical optimist. Facts tell us that the world has done amazing progress, like I have showed you. Facts also show that faced with a crisis, humankind can solve it. We have emerged stronger from wars, pandemics, natural disasters, or totalitarian ideologies. Facts cannot, however, tell us to choose cooperation over conflict or solidarity over egoism or diversity over nationalism. But knowledge about human nature is can tell us that human nature is fundamentally cooperative and willing to learn and connect. Altruism is unique to the human species. In his book, The Kindness of Strangers, Michael McCulloch sweeps through science and history to solve what he calls the enigma of generosity to strangers. And he discovers the advantages of altruism. And the Norwegian scholar Dag O. Hessen beautifully describes this in another book, simply titled We. It's about how we are programmed to cooperate from ourselves to society, between humans, but also humanity with nature. Cooperation is simply an important part of our success as a species. But enough now, this is not a book circle after all, it's the Norad Conference, full of international star speakers. We are in the early stages of what will be a tough decade, the 2020s, where poverty reduction has stagnated, where we are not protecting our precious nature well enough, and where conflicts and authoritarian rule is on the rise. But we, humans, have it in us to fight back. We have fought off worse challenges, because it's actually human nature to cooperate and to show altruism in order to develop. So let's make sure this decade will be remembered as the decade of breakthroughs and the decade of action. The world needs it. Are you with me? I wish you all a hopeful conference. Thank you.